In an era where precedent is shattered almost daily, it seems, precedent was yet again shattered a couple days ago when former President Donald Trump became the first ever former president of the United States to not only be convicted of a crime, but specifically be convicted of a felony. What makes this even crazier is the fact that he may, in fact, be the first president to have a felony at the time he's elected, being that he is the presumptive Republican nominee for the 2024 presidential election, and a lot of people think he's probably going to win. Now, there has been some impact on the polls after this guilty verdict. There's appeals to come, and there is a lot more court intrigue that has not been discussed in your mainstream news sources. Today, we're going to be going over all of that and ask ourselves the question, what was Trump charged with? Why does it matter? And what is going to happen in the near future here on today's episode of The Watchdog? Shalom, friends, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are indeed living in biblical times. And today's episode, I think, will be a doozy for you. We got some more precedent-shattering events that have taken place in the last month. And, of course, it seems like these days, what even is precedent, right? It's just tossed out constantly. Whether or not you agree with the things that are taking place, that's not even what I'm talking about right now. I'm just making the simple point that precedent is just non-existent anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But regardless of whether or not it's a good thing, it is something that's happening, and it's something we're going to have to deal with. At any rate, let me get through a couple of the channel housekeeping things. First off, remember this show is found exclusively on TheCynicogue News. So if you like this show, please remember to like and subscribe. Hit the bell to get notified every single time that we go live. Remember, you can leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything of that nature in the comment section down below. If you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, you may do so. I am on Gab. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Minds, MeWe, Telegram, and Truth Social, all at the tag TheCynicogue. And I don't know if I said Gab, but Gab as well. So you can follow me on any of those social media platforms if you frequent them. And please do remember to share this video to those platforms if you are, in fact, on those platforms. That will certainly be super sweet. Remember, you can contribute to the work we do here through a couple different methods. I do have a TheCynicogue News Patreon. So if you're interested in giving a monthly subscription to the Patreon because you like the journalism we're doing here, please do consider doing that. It is greatly appreciated. Also, if you want to contribute but are only able to contribute one time, you can give as much or as little as you like to the PayPal. Remember, those of you who do give to the Patreon do end up getting access to this Blogladite blog, which is going to be reposted for the second time in 2 weeks. Actually, it's a little bit less than 2 weeks at this point because it's going to be next Saturday. But we had a blog. The blog was defunct for quite some time, and now we're bringing it back, right? So you will get access to that blog if, in fact, you decide to subscribe to the Patreon for $10 monthly. If you want to give less than that, you certainly can. You can give as much or as little as you like. But nevertheless, that is, I think it's actually $5. Anyways, I'll go ahead and check that at some point. At any rate, please also remember to follow us over on the Rumble account. Following us on Rumble is incredibly important for 3 reasons, really. Number one is the fact that we get content taken down on this channel. This is a conservative political talk show, and YouTube doesn't like that, right? YouTube is not very fond of a lot of political positions that the conservatives hold to, right? Including yours truly, excuse me, and especially, in fact, yours truly, because I, even by conservative standards today, am considered somewhat of a radical, though by conservative standards of our fathers' generations, that would just be normal. But, you know, who has time for normality or normalcy, whatever. at any rate, because of that, if we do end up getting videos taken down, the place you're going to be able to find them is Rumble, right? So say, for example, this video got taken down, and maybe it will, maybe it won't, I don't know. But if it did get taken down, you wanted to see it, or you wanted to rewatch it, or you wanted to show it to your friends, the place you would have to go to in order to make that happen would be the Rumble account, right? Because it's still going to be there, but it won't be here anymore. And I won't be able to post it here anymore without, getting some kind of a YouTube terms and conditions, violation. So that's the first reason. The second reason is it's possible, obviously hasn't happened, but it's possible that this entire channel gets taken down at some point. Right now, we only have 84 subs. We're a very small channel. We tend to get somewhere between 10 and 30 views a video. It's not very important, right? Not very important. Hopefully, one day it will be somewhat important, and at that time, it will be more and more likely each day that this channel gets taken down. It's also possible that YouTube wants to take it down before that actually happens. Of course, we're going to try and avoid that. But if it does happen, guess where you're going to have to go in order to get any Watchdog content? You're going to have to go to Rumble, right? So it's better to just get subscribed to the channel now, get an account, get subscribed to the channel now, than to have to wait for that event to happen if indeed it does happen. Right, better to need it and not have it, than have it and not need it, or better to have it and not need it, than need it and not have it. It's kind of one of those things, right? So that's the second reason why it's important to subscribe to the Rumble. And the third reason that it's important to subscribe to the Rumble is that the YouTube overlords and all of the big tech overlords are trying to censor your speech. And the only recourse you have is by utilizing their competition, okay? The government is not going to do anything about YouTube censorship. YouTube is not going to do anything about YouTube censorship. The collection of people who use this platform, whether that be the creators or the users, have so far shown an unwillingness to do anything about YouTube censorship. So what recourse do you have as somebody who wants to fight back against YouTube censorship? You have one, and that is using YouTube competitors, right? If you use their competitors, first off, you potentially have another platform that could get big that you could see all these guys on, right? And secondly, you might actually threaten YouTube into changing their policies, right? Into not actually doing all the censorship and stuff like that, because they're scared of losing more and more money, more and more viewers, more and more creators to websites like Rumble, right? So if you want to fight against big tech censorship, the best way to do that is not signing petitions or making a movement. It's simply getting a Rumble account and watching videos on Rumble, right? So please do consider doing that. Hashtag not spawn, but still, it is something you should definitely consider doing. And hopefully one day I will be sponsored. Who knows? All right. As far as channel housekeeping, that is pretty much everything. At least I think. Let me continue to think here. Yeah. I don't think we have anything else. So today is June 6th, 2024. We like to do with this day in history. And for those of you guys who are historically wise, you probably already know where I'm going to go with this, because how could I possibly not, right? Today is the day in which Operation Overlord and Operation Neptune took place in the year 1944. In other words, today is the day, the first day, well, the day as far as D-Day is concerned, of D-Day, right? Today is the first day of the Allied invasion of the European continent that ended up ultimately removing the Nazi regime from power in Germany. June 6, 1944 is when that took place. It is one of the most, really one of the most risky and bold military decisions, I think, of all time. My buddy Kyle would very frequently say things like, "We had a 20-sided die and we roll a 22 on this particular day." And he's kind of right. There's so much intrigue that happens on this particular day. Like, there was a bunch of weather. It had been delayed a couple times, and this was actually the last day that really we could end up doing it. And it's just a very interesting story. Of course, it's a story that's been commemorated in film and in literature numerous times. I think probably the most famous example of that being Saving Private Ryan. And a lot of us, maybe not so much anymore. It is 2024, so this is the 80-year anniversary of it. But a lot of us might have at least some living relatives who were there. I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't personally. I first off, my great grandpa was in the Pacific Theater, not in the European theater, but nevertheless, he also passed away in 2009, unfortunately. I think actually it was 2008. I was pretty young at the time. At any rate, so some of you might even have relatives who you could speak to about this. And at least bare minimum, there's probably at least a couple veterans of D-Day still kicking somewhere in the country. Not 100% sure about that. Maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But regardless, massive event that ultimately led to the complete and total destruction of Nazi Germany, the conquest of Hitler, the removal of that vile evil from this planet, and everything that has come since then has been really indebted to June 6th, 1944. So it's definitely a moment in history to commemorate. Now, with that being said, we have an interesting show here today. Felonious Trump, I have titled this. Why? Because former U.S. President and potentially future U.S. President Donald J. Trump has officially been convicted of a felony. A lot of you guys probably already know that because I'm kind of a Johnny-come-lately here, right? But nevertheless, it has happened. It is the first time a former president has been tried and found guilty in a felony criminal charge. And if he is elected, it'll, of course, be the first time that a future president has a felony charge. He'll be the first president elected to have a felony charge. Now, as I'm going to discuss here today, I don't think that he is the last president to get a felony charge. I think that this is going to set a new precedent whereby we are actually much less queasy about charging politicians with crimes. Excuse me. Whether that be for good or for bad is not really what I'm getting into this very moment, but it is something that I think we're going to have to expect as a result of this. It used to be that you really avoided charging your political opponents with crimes, even if you had reason to suspect they were guilty of those crimes. A couple famous examples of that would include, but not be limited to, Henry Kissinger was accused of war crimes. Nothing ever ended up happening with that. Richard Nixon was, of course, famously pardoned for Watergate by Gerald Ford, and a lot of people thought he would have been charged had he not been pardoned. Bill Clinton famously committed perjury over the Monica Lewinsky thing, and Hillary Clinton, of course, had the very famous email scandal wherein she was, I don't exactly know how they would word it, but at any rate, illegally storing classified emails in her private email. I think recklessness is probably the best word for that. But at any rate, we could go on and on and on and on with different examples of this, right? A lot of people have accused Nancy Pelosi of insider trading. There's been a lot of links of politicians to the Epstein Islands, so on and so forth. Whether or not all of that is true, obviously, is something that the courts would have to figure out on an individual basis. But the point is, none of them have ever been charged. Nixon wasn't charged. The Clintons weren't charged. Kissinger wasn't charged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People just were not charged for this sort of thing, right? Well, then Donald Trump made everybody really, 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 really mad. And he ended up getting charged not only for the hush money thing that he just was found guilty of, but actually a couple other crimes that we'll be looking into today. I think he has 4 total criminal trials, if I remember correctly. I'll pull up the article here in a moment, so we'll be reading about it. But no, nevertheless, and the fact that he was charged in general was really kind of a precedent shatterer. Because as we said, with those other guys, Nixon, Clinton, and Kissinger, and so on, they were never even charged, right? Let alone found guilty. Trump now not only has been charged, but has been found guilty of the charges, specifically the hush money charges. So I think in the future, we are going to see this. It's not, I don't know if it'll become horribly frequent, right? I don't know if this is the beginning of a banana republic. It very well could be, to be honest. And regardless of if we end up seeing some kind of banana republic or not, I do think we're about to see more and more politicians being charged with crimes, and probably most especially by their political opponents, because they're the people who can reap benefit from charging these people with crimes. Fun fact, that's really the reason why we didn't charge politicians with crimes is because people were worried that that might end up creating a political situation where somebody gets elected, does something the other side doesn't like, and the other side finds a way to charge them with a crime. I mean, there's so many different laws they could do it, right? There was a famous Soviet juror that once said, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." I think we're at a point in federal law where we can do that, right? There's enough laws on the books that we could probably do that. And people were worried that this would end up being a way to suppress political opposition. I know certainly a lot of Trump fans believe that at this moment, and they're not entirely wrong. Although there is certainly some truth to the fact that Trump is guilty of some of the things of which he's accused. Right. Nevertheless, we're going to get directly into this. I just wanted to say beforehand how I think this is going to end up manifesting in numerous politicians being charged. I think it's probably going to typically be one-sided, right? In other words, I think it's going to be more Nixon's being charged and less Clinton's. Why do I believe that? Well, because the institutions are currently controlled by liberals and neocons, right? Certainly not progressive liberals yet, although that's probably coming, but definitely your old guard Democrats and your old guard Republicans at this point. They have control over the FISA courts, they have control over the Pentagon, they have control over the CIA, the FBI, and et cetera, most of the institutions in American law enforcement, right? So that is definitely something to consider. But I just wanted to say, again, I think that we are going to start seeing more and more politicians being charged with crimes as a result of this. Typically one-sided, but not always. When the Republicans have the opportunity to do it, they will do it also. And it's going to be a lot different. This ain't your, put it this way, this ain't your grandma's American election cycle, right? But nevertheless, let's go ahead and jump right into some of the articles today. So first off, we're going to state some of the obvious. Trump hush money verdict. Trump becomes first former U.S. president convicted of felony crimes. If I understand correctly, I think Trump is the first president convicted of any crimes, whether that be felony or misdemeanor or anything else. I don't even think there's been a former president convicted of a civil in a civil case. Excuse me. I could be wrong about that. Somebody correct me if I am, but I don't recall any former presidents actually being found guilty of any crimes. The only ones I could think of are, Richard Nixon could have been, but of course he wasn't. Bill Clinton could have been, but of course he wasn't. John Tyler maybe could have been charged with treason because he ended up serving in the Confederate Congress, but he died before the end of the Civil War, so he wasn't charged with treason. And I don't really know who else would even qualify. Maybe Warren G. Harding potentially for the whole teapot scandal. I don't think he was charged for anything in that though. There was a lot of corruption around Ulysses S. Grant, but most of that Grant wasn't even participating in most of that. He was actually, he was more naive than anything else. I don't know. Maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think any president has been convicted of any crime ever before this particular moment, let alone a felony. But if I'm wrong on that, I am wrong on that. At any rate, the article says Donald Trump became the first former American president to be convicted of felony crimes Thursday as a New York jury found him guilty of all 34 charges in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election through a hush money payment to a porn actor who said the two had sex. Now, for some background, for those who don't know, you may recall Donald Trump, when he was running for president in 2016, controversy arose about him having an affair with pornographic actress Stormy Daniels, right? And of course, she ended up just relaunching a massive tour around the country for her porn career. Ended up doing great for her porn career, which made a lot of us very suspicious, myself included. That being said, it actually does appear that the affair did take place, but whatever. It happened before he was president. That's actually not what the charge was for. What the charge was for is that he had actually paid her off, I believe $100,000, if I remember correctly, to not talk about this particular case. Now, that she ended up talking about this event anyways, and I think she was even sued, and successfully so, by Trump for having talked about this, even though she took money to explicitly not talk about this. And the New York court basically decided that this was an example of illegally using money to illegally influence the 2016 presidential election. And we'll get a little bit more detail on that here as we continue forward. But I just wanted to give you guys some of the context there again. Trump sat stone-faced while the verdict was read, as cheering from the street below could be heard in the hallway on the courthouse's 15th floor, where the decision was revealed after more than 9 hours of deliberation, which, of course, that is somewhat concerning, right? These people are cheering not because they think justice has been done, but because they really don't like the former president. And to be fair, I'm, as you guys know, not a fan of the former president. I think he's kind of a stain on conservatism. That being said, I would not cheer his conviction for numerous reasons. Number one, I don't particularly like the prospect of politicians being charged by their political opponents every time somebody new comes into power. I'm also not 100% sure that he's guilty. I mean, there's a lot of information out there on either side. I'm not convinced he's not guilty either. Obviously, legally, he's guilty, so that's just a fact. But it's confusing, to say the least. And also, I just wouldn't, even if he is guilty, I wouldn't be cheering the guilty verdict. If anything, we would cheer that justice has been done, but there's no personal vendetta against Trump that should cause us to cheer a guilty verdict. And that should apply to everybody, by the way. If one of our political opponents were to be charged with something, like if Clinton was charged with the whole email thing, and she ended up being found guilty, we should not be sitting there saying, oh, ha, 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 that's awesome, down with Clinton. That's not the way a truly just society reacts to guilty verdicts. Guilty verdicts are bad things, okay? The reason they're bad things is because if they are 100% legit, what guilty verdicts mean is that somebody committed a crime, okay? And crime is bad. Crime is a negative thing. Crime is sinful in most instances, okay? So we should not be cheering guilty verdicts. We should want guilty verdicts when they're necessary, okay? And I even have a particularly harsh view on criminality, right? Where I think that we go a little bit too soft on obviously not every crime is created equal, but we're a little bit too soft on most criminals in the United States of America. For example, I think we should be a little bit more liberal with our use of the death penalty. That obviously doesn't apply to this particular case, but I'm just trying to make the point. I'm not soft on crime. I'm just simply making the point, if somebody is accused of a crime and ends up having the death penalty levied on their head, right? We should not be saying, yeah, kill that guy. You know what I mean? It should be actually kind of a somber moment. It sucks that people have to go to prison. It sucks that people have to be found guilty of crimes. It sucks that people have to be executed. It still has to happen, obviously, right? But we should look at it as a somber thing, not as a moment to celebrate, okay? Even victims should not sit there and yay, I hate that guy so much. Because again, a guilty verdict at its best means that something evil happened and that a person, of course, has been convicted of having done that evil thing. At best, guilty verdicts mean something evil happened. We should not be cheering evil things happening. That's evil. If you find yourself cheering somebody going to prison or being executed or any other such punishment in a criminal case, you're a bad person. You need to repent of that, okay? Again, doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It should happen. And in fact, it should happen even more than it currently does. But it doesn't mean it's a good thing. Just wanted to get that clear. Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts marks the end of his historic hush money trial. And while I think we definitely overuse this word in the modern day, this definitely was historic. I just recently made a joke at work with my chef. History does not even remember who Calvin Coolidge is. History does not even remember who Warren G. Harding is. History does not remember who William Howard Taft is, other than a fat joke, right? John Tyler, who's that guy, right? History forgets these guys, and the history nerds like myself end up remembering a lot of these guys. But for the most part, not only could your average citizen not mention them, of course, your average citizen probably doesn't even know who George Washington is at this point. Americans are so stupid. But history, in the general sense, forgets who all of these people are, right? But you do have certain presidents history does not forget. Washington being one of them, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, right? Abraham Lincoln, obviously, FDR, Dwight Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan thus far, and I think probably in the future. Well, one of those presidents' history is 100% going to remember, whether you like it or not, Donald J. Trump. History, for sure, will remember Donald J. Trump. And they might be remembering two different terms, right? We'll get to that in a minute, but who knows? We'll see. It might happen. I mean, at this point, the vast majority of Americans are picking between a felon, thrice divorced, and serial philanderer, felonious who is thrice divorced, felonious man who's thrice divorced, and the serial philanderer, or a senile liar who is nothing more than a puppet for progressive elements that would very much like to destroy the country. So you don't exactly have any good options right now, right? And I think a lot of people are going to end up voting for Trump as a result. He might end up getting the election. I'm personally going to be voting for Randall Terry of the Constitution Party. I know that vote's going to go nowhere, but he's the only person who I feel comfortable voting for, and maybe we'll do a special report on that at some point. How did Trump respond? Trump falsely blasted a rigged trial and attacked star witness in a speech on Friday. Now, the falsely there is the opinion of AP News. I'm not saying whether or not it was false, but nevertheless, I just want to point out that is AP News' own opinion. It could have been rigged. It could not have been rigged. Okay, I don't have a position on it. I just want to point out that their position on it is an opinion, which is fine. They are allowed to share their opinion. But it is an opinion. It's not a fact. Or at least we don't know it's a fact, put it that way. When is the sentencing? July 11th, just days before Republicans are set to pick Trump as the 2024 nominee. That's a month and 5 days for those who are keeping count. Can Trump vote? He may be convicted and reside in Florida, but can still vote as long as he stays out of prison in New York State. Will this impact the election? It is unclear whether Trump's once imaginable status as a person convicted of a felony will have any, I think once unimaginable is what they meant, status as a person convicted of a felony will have any impact at all on the voters. We'll get to that in a moment. It seems like it's having somewhat of an impact. And for the Trump campaign, it is actually a little bit negative. Quote, this was a rigged, disgraceful trial, end quote, an angry Trump told reporters after leaving the courtroom. Quote, the real verdict is going to be on November 5th by the people. They know what happened, and everyone knows what happened here, end quote. Judge Juan M. Merchan, or Merkin, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, set sentencing for July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, where GOP leaders who remained resolute in their support in the aftermath of the verdict are expected to formally make him their nominee. And I can just go ahead and say I think it would take something massive for Trump not to receive the nominee. And I mean even more massive than this particular case. Like he might have to be found guilty of murder, and even then I'm not convinced that he that he would end up actually having he would, oh my goodness, come on, Jay. Let's go. That he would end up not getting the nomination as a result of a murder conviction. Maybe he would. I don't know. He's got a very rabid fan base. And like I said, there's not exactly a lot of options right now in the Republican Party. The verdict is a stunning legal reckoning for Trump and exposes him to potential prison time in the city where his manipulations of the tabloid press helped catapult him from a real estate tycoon to reality television star and ultimately president. I do have to take issue with that. Trump was not manipulating the press. That's not why he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire because he is a brilliant businessman. Okay, we can dislike somebody's political positions or dislike somebody's personal lifestyle and stuff like that, and still not lie about them. Right? The man is definitely a brilliant businessman. He earned his billions. So I would like to be very clear about that. I mean, that's just stupid on AP News' part. But at any rate, as he seeks to reclaim the White House in this year's election, the judgment presents voters with another test of their willingness to accept Trump's boundary-breaking behavior. And, of course, that is also something we would take issue with here on this channel because that's part of the reason why I think we're going to start seeing these trials more and more, is because it's really not boundary-breaking. We think of it as boundary-breaking. The thing is, Trump's kind of just saying the quiet part out loud. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's definitely not. But it is absolutely clear that Donald Trump, that President Joe Biden, that Hillary Clinton, that Nancy Pelosi, that Mitch McConnell, all of these guys are pretty consistently doing things which anybody else would not be allowed to do. You know what I mean? So is it boundary breaking? Not really. It's just that Trump is the first guy to make everybody mad enough that people are doing something about it. Which is part of the reason why I think we're going to start seeing these trials more and more and more as time goes on. At any rate, continuing forward, let's see. Trump is expected to appeal the verdict and will face an awkward dynamic as he returns to the campaign trail tagged with convictions. There are no campaign rallies on the calendar for now, though he traveled Thursday evening to a fundraiser in Manhattan that was planned before the verdict, according to 3 people familiar with his plans who are not authorized to speak publicly. He's expected to appear Friday at Trump Tower and will continue fundraising next week. I believe that Friday is tomorrow. It might have been last Friday, though. His campaign was already moving quickly to raise money off the verdict, issuing a pitch that called him a political prisoner, which I think is half true. I think Trump is guilty, but I also think he wouldn't be charged if he were a Democrat, if I'm being honest, or even if he was a neocon. Which, do with that information what you will. And I don't know. I just said I think Trump is guilty. To be honest, I go back and forth with that. You may have even heard me in the beginning of this episode say I don't know if I think he's guilty, because I do kind of fluctuate back and forth. Is he? Maybe, actually. Not 100% sure. A lot of information out there. I guess I'll put it this way. I do, at the very least, think that he is guilty of paying off Stormy Daniels and of having an affair with Stormy Daniels. Whether or not that constitutes a crime is, I think, the question, right? And you know, there's, like I said, a lot of different information about that throughout this YouTube sphere. The falsifying business records charges carry up to 4 years behind bars, though Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg would not say Thursday whether prosecutors intended to seek imprisonment, and it is not clear whether the judge, who earlier in the trial warned of jail time for gag order violations, would impose the punishment even if asked. The conviction and even imprisonment will not bar Trump from continuing his White House pursuit. That is correct. You are allowed to run for president of the United States as a felon, and you are allowed to run for president of the United States from prison. And it happened before. I don't think Trump will go to prison. That's my personal prediction. He might. I don't think he will. But nevertheless, if he did, that would not prevent him from being president of the United States. Pressing forward. The verdict is a stunning, let's see, no, that's, how did I end up getting there? The conviction and even imprisonment will not bar, just read that. Trump faces 3 other felony indictments, but the New York case may be the only one to reach conclusion before the November election, adding to the significance of the outcome. We'll let you know about those 3 indictments here in a moment. Though the legal and historical implications of the verdict are readily apparent, the political consequences are less so, given its potential to reinforce rather than reshape already hardened opinions about Trump. And I think that's entirely true. He is absolutely going to have those who love him more now and think of him as a martyr. Those who hate him more now and think of him as a criminal. So, I mean, they're entirely right about that. For another candidate in another time, a criminal conviction might doom a presidential run, but Trump's political career has endured through 2 impeachments, allegations of sexual abuse, investigations into everything from potential ties to Russia to plotting to overturn the election, and personally salacious storylines, including the emergence of a recording in which he boasted about grabbing women's genitals. Now, there is a reason for that, right? Again, you guys know I'm not a Donald Trump fan. At the same time, I can call a spade, okay? And there is a reason why his career has survived all of this nonsense. It's because most of it is nonsense. For example, with the impeachments, the impeachment for the whole Ukraine thing, I don't think what Trump did was smart, right? He basically said, hey, I want you to investigate this political corruption, which just so happens to include Hunter Biden, the son of the person I'm running against, or I'm not going to give you any money for this upcoming war. which, of course, we didn't know there was a war upcoming at the time, but nevertheless. Was that intelligent? No. Did it look bad on camera? Yeah, but was it a crime? Was it something worthy of impeachment? No. No, it definitely wasn't. And fast forward, 4 or 5 years? I think that was 2019 when that happened, if I remember correctly. And we are now 100% positive that there definitely was Biden-centric corruption in Ukraine. It's just a fact at this point, right? So not only was that not something that was worthy of impeachment, but Trump turned out to be right. What about the second impeachment, the whole January 6th thing? January 6th has been hugely overblown. January 6th, which, by the way, is the holiday of Epiphany. So if you want to remember January 6th for anything, celebrate Epiphany. But at any rate, January 6th was an event where there was a couple of bad actors. They did not try to commit treason. They were not trying to overthrow the government. There were a couple of bad actors in a mostly law-abiding crowd. Okay? Those bad actors probably should have been charged with what they were charged with. Obviously, you're not allowed to bust in. Although, the reason I have the word probably there is because there's pretty solid evidence to suggest they were let in by law enforcement, right? And there's a lot of really shady things around January the 6th. It's also very clear that a lot of the people who have been charged in the January 6th thing didn't do anything, right? At least, and also, you have the fact that all of this took place, all of this took place mere months after tons and tons, millions of progressive leftists rioted all across the country, destroying billions of dollars worth of property, murdering people, I'll point that out as well, committing sexual crimes, establishing insurrection, like actual insurrection governments. People say J6 was an insurrection. It was not. That's a lie. You know what was actually an insurrection? CHAZ, which stands for the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. They were literally calling themselves an autonomous zone. That means a self-governing region. They had people with guns going about enforcing their laws. They had elected officials, quote unquote. Right? That was a legitimate insurrection. And there were people not only in Washington, but in numerous other states storming Capitol buildings and taking them over. But a couple months later, it happened to the White House, and all of a sudden, our sacred democracy, right? So that was also bogus. What about the allegations of sexual abuse? Simply no evidence. Simply no evidence. There's a lot of things from a sexual perspective that you can charge Donald Trump with. I don't mean charge in the legal sense. You know, he clearly cheated on his wives, all three of them. He's been married 3 times, which is problematic. He's obviously had his hand in Playboy and in erotic modeling and in beauty pageants and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff you could say. Guess what? Sexual abuse? Not one of them. There's no evidence. Could he have? Possibly. I guess it's totally possible. But there's absolutely no evidence for it. Potential ties to Russia? We literally had a years-long investigation into this that revealed there was no Russian collusion. Right? So why did Trump survive all of these things? Because they were all plainly bullshit, if you'll excuse my French. And again, that comes from somebody who is not a Trump fan. That comes from somebody who will not vote for him in 2024, didn't vote for him in 2016, and who only begrudgingly voted for him in 2020. Right? That comes from somebody who very vocally thinks that he has effectively destroyed conservatism in America, or at least that he was the death knell because it was already on its way out. Our position as the moral bulwark in America has been depleted to such an extent that the vast majority of people trying to do the moral bulwark thing in America have now become Christian nationalists or something along those lines, right? They're considered on the fringes of the Republican Party at this point, right? And of course, in the Democratic Party, they don't even exist. Despite the fact that I feel that way, I can still recognize that the Russia collusion thing was nonsense. The January 6th thing was nonsense. The accusations of sexual abuse were nonsense. The accusation of him being racist were nonsense. The accusation that he was somehow doing a quid pro quo with Ukraine was nonsense. This was all nonsense. Boulder Dash and bourgeois. right? So, of course, he survived those things. Now, this one's a little bit different because whether or not he committed a crime, that's the problem. That's the question. The state of New York thinks yes. We'll see what the appeals courts because he is going to appeal it. But obviously he did do it. Nobody denies that he did have an affair with Stormy Daniels, and nobody denies that he did pay her off to try and keep her quiet about it during the presidential election. The question is that legal? Right? And that's the thing that we're trying to figure out here. So will he survive this? I'm not sure. We'll see. But with all those other things, it makes sense that he survived them because they were all stupid. The case's general allegations have also been known to voters for years, which is true, and while tawdry, are widely seen as less grievous than the allegations he faces in 3 other cases that charge him with subverting American democracy and mishandling national security. Now, on that particular note, I lost my... Why does that keep happening? I don't understand. Come on. On that particular note, we do want to now start talking about the other cases Trump has been charged with, or the other cases Trump is involved with, I guess I should say. Trump trials, what to know and why they matter. Excuse me, let me get a drink of my coffee here. The cases against former President Donald Trump can be tough to keep straight. Here's what you need to know about his legal woes. Okay. Former President Donald Trump has faced charges in 4 different cases that range in scope and severity and are playing out in 4 different locations: New York, Miami, D.C., and Atlanta. One of those courtrooms, New York, he has already been convicted. Trump, the GOP frontrunner in the 2024 presidential election, has faced a mix of state and federal charges and denied wrongdoing in every case. His legal team also has maneuvered to delay the various proceedings for as long as possible in hopes of returning the former president to the White House, where he would likely be able to avoid or stave off potential prison time. And in fact, he probably would no longer even be going to court at that point. Skipping ahead to the indictments. Indictment 1, what we just read about, is the hush money. The case, Trump's first indictment on March 30th, 2023, centered around his role in reimbursing his former attorney, Michael Cohen, for paying off porn star Stormy Daniels in 2016 to keep her quiet about what she says was an extramarital affair she had with Trump a decade earlier. Prosecutors charged that the hush money amounted to a bid to influence the presidential election. With the case, Trump became the first former president to be charged with a crime, and he was, exactly. Trump became the first former president to be charged with any crime. That's what I thought. He was arraigned on April 3rd, 2023 in a Manhattan criminal court. The trial began on April 15th, 2024. That's this year, of course. The case was brought by Manhattan, District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and overseen by acting New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merkin. The charges: former president was charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records for what prosecutors say was the illegal concealment of payments made as part of an elaborate catch-and-kill hush money scheme carried out during Trump's 2016 presidential campaign in a bid to influence the election. That's important because that it makes it sound like this crime actually, excuse me, man. Makes it sound like this is a business crime, not actually a crime in influencing the election as the news is reporting it, which is, I think, a kind of an interesting thing to point out there. Jury selections began on April 15th, blah, 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 blah. We already know about that. Verdict on May 30th. The jury emerged from deliberations and announced its verdict, finding Trump guilty on all 34 counts and making him the first former president convicted of a felony or any crime for that matter. Each carries a maximum prison sentence of 4 years. Merkin set Trump's sentencing date for July 4th, 2024, subject to presidential pardon. No. Will he end up serving time in prison? I personally do not think so. And if he did, to be honest with you, I think that would create massive problems. The former president's second indictment came on June 9th. June 9th hasn't happened yet. So do you mean June 9th, 2023? You must. When a grand jury accused him of illegally retaining classified information after he left office, showing some of those documents to individuals without proper clearance and hatching a plan to hide the materials from officials in defiance of a federal subpoena. Trump was arraigned on June 13th at a federal courthouse in Miami before new charges were unveiled in a superseding indictment in July. The case was brought by Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith and is overseen by U.S. District Attorney Eileen Cannon. Now, this is one of those things that I think if Trump is found guilty for this, we're going to have a lot of problems in the future. Why? Because, let me put it to you this way. This is something that other political officials we know for a fact are guilty of. For example, Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, it is undeniable. Both of them are guilty of the same thing, right? So when the Republicans get power, or at least get the power to be able to carry this kind of thing out, if Trump is found guilty, it is 100% guaranteed, in my personal opinion, I guess, that others will also be found guilty of this exact same crime. It's just going to happen, right? So just be prepared for it. Ongoing disputes between the parties, including over making a list of witnesses public, have delayed what was supposed to be a start date of May 20th for the trial. Cannon has given no indication of when the proceedings will begin and is considering a series of petitions made by Trump's legal team for dismissal of the case, which may end up happening. Most recently, she granted Trump's request to postpone the deadline for an important filing that asks his defense team to list the classified documents they intend to use in the trial, a move that makes it all but certain the trial will not start until after the 2024 presidential election. And if Trump is elected, that means it likely won't start at all. I don't think you can charge a sitting president legally. Legal experts have observed that Cannon, who was appointed by Trump, has made a handful of questionable rulings and decisions that favor the former president, including two that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed. Now, I think it's probably safe to say, whether or not Cannon is actually a legit judge, that the only reason people have a problem with this is because they were pro-Trump rulings, right? In other words, if this same exact judge had been appointed by Biden and was making pro-Biden rulings, I don't think these same people would have problems, though I think the Republicans would probably have problems, right? This is one of those instances where everybody who's on the other side is mad. You know what I mean? And why are they mad? Because they're on the other side and the guy they don't like seems to be potentially getting a break. The charges. The indictment includes multiple counts of 7 separate charges, listing 38 overlapping criminal offenses from Trump and his longtime aide, Walt Nauta, 37 of which are directed at Trump. The charges include willful retention of national defense information, conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or record, corruptly concealing a document or record, concealing a document in a federal investigation, scheme to conceal and make false statements, and etc. The additional charges announced July 27th include another count of retention of national security information and 2 new obstruction of justice charges. The indictment also named the property manager of Mar-a-Lago, Carlos de Oliveira, as a new defendant in the case. Personally think that one will not end up being, Trump will not end up being found guilty in that one, but nevertheless, if he is, there's going to be, I think, a lot of problems for us in the future. A federal grand jury handed up Trump's third indictment on August the 1st in connection with what prosecutors say were efforts to overturn the results of his 2020 election loss and undermine America's democracy, which, of course, did not happen. That is a lie. He was arraigned on August the 3rd at a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. Now, recall that Donald Trump said quite explicitly to the crowd, first off, he told them to disperse, right? Secondly, before he had told them to disperse, he said he wanted them to make themselves known peacefully, okay? And thirdly, Donald Trump never at any point made, this is an argument from silence, but in this particular case, an argument from silence is a good argument because this is a place where arguments from silence can be legitimate if the silence is unexpected, right? And in this particular case, there is no record of Donald Trump actively stoking the flames, saying, storm the White House, overthrow the election, execute Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez while she sits there and cries about things that didn't even happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen, right? So he will for sure, he will for sure not be found guilty in this case. Or if he is, he will for sure have an appeal that will end up being successful. The case was brought by Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith and is overseen by U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. Tukin initially set a March 4th date for the trial to begin, but has since delayed the trial until an issue over whether Trump can use presidential immunity as a defense is resolved. On February 6th, a panel of 3 judges, and I think he will end up winning that presidential immunity issue. On February 6th, a panel of 3 judges who serve in the U.S. Supreme Court for D.C. Circuit ruled that Trump cannot invoke presidential immunity as a defense. Trump appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, and the justices on February 28th agreed to consider it. During oral arguments on April 25th, conservative justices seemed sympathetic to, though not entirely accepting of, the idea that a president should enjoy at least some immunity, driven in large part by fears over cyclical retribution that would befall future presidents and prevent them from making decisive and sometimes controversial decisions required by their office. That is entirely warranted. Immunity is a complicated issue because obviously if a president commits a crime, you don't want him to be allowed to get away with it just because he was the president, right? At the same time, obviously, there needs to be some level of immunity in order to avoid us going into a banana republic. And I happen to agree with their ruling in this particular case, or with their sympathies, I should say. They didn't rule. That there is a worry this could create a cycle of political violence, right? The justices acknowledge the question before them has huge implications for the future of the presidency and the future of the country, and focus much of their time trying to parse the difference between official acts of a president versus private acts. It's unclear whether the justices will deliver a decision or whether they will send it back to the lower court to grapple with the specifics of presidential immunity. They have until the end of their term, which is the end of June, to do so. Most legal experts agree that the longer they wait, the more likely it is that the trial is pushed until after the election. The charges: Trump is being charged with 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States, 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, 1 count of obstruction and an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and 1 count of conspiracy against knights. Now, if he does end up being charged with this, or convicted of this, I think there will be hell to pay. I think there will be absolute hell to pay. And whether that is in the form of cycles of political violence, or whether that is in the form of riots from people who are pro-Trump, or whether that is in the form of outright civil war, regardless, whatever form it takes, I think there will be absolute hell to pay if he ends up being found guilty of this crime, because everybody knows that it's bogus, right? And then indictment 4, Georgia RICO and conspiracy. Trump's 4th indictment came late on August 14th, 2023, when a grand jury accused him and more than a dozen of his allies of orchestrating a massive criminal enterprise to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. The former president and his co-defendants were arraigned on, and he'll for sure be found innocent of this one as well. The only one that I think there was a legitimate case against him at all is the one which he's been currently found guilty in. The former president and his co-defendants were arraigned on September the 6th, 2023. And by the way, asterisk on that, it may not even end up being legitimate. I'm just saying that's the best case they have. At a courthouse in Atlanta. The case was brought by District Attorney Fannie Willis and will be overseen by Fulton County Superior Judge Scott McAfee. Really quickly, let's just go down to the charges for sake of time. Of the 41 charges brought against 19 defendants in the case, Trump faced 13, including a violation of the state racketeering law, or RICO, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, conspiracy to commit forgery, conspiracy to commit false statements and writings, committing false statements and writings, conspiracy to commit filing false documents, and filing false documents. McAfee on March 14th dismissed 6 of those charges, including 3 against Trump, saying that prosecutors had not provided enough detail to support them. The charges accused defendants of soliciting public officers to violate their oaths. McAfee left open the possibility that prosecutors could either re-indict defendants on the charges with more detail, or that they could seek permission to appeal the ruling. Trump still faces 10 counts. He is an unindicted co-conspirator in an Arizona fake electors case. He is an unindicted co-conspirator in a Michigan fake electors case as well. So these are the Trump trials. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on with that, and most of those will probably see him found innocent, or we'll see him not charged at all, as they are either dismissed or they take so long that he's already the president by then and is able to do, the runaround to make sure he will not be charged. Now, how does this impact polling? Well, a polling do-over finds that Trump's lead shrank after the guilty verdict. Trump's 3-point lead over Biden before the jury rendered its verdict shrank to just a 1-point lead when respondents were quizzed after the decision. There's very obvious reason for that. Trump has a very rabid base, right? He has a base that, in fact, Trump really has one of the most loyal and supportive bases of any politician I've ever seen. He's not, I wouldn't say the most, but it's certainly up there. And when I say I've seen, I'm not talking about just in my lifetime, but even going back into history, right? There are others who have had a equally supportive base. You know, Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders. I think a lot of people with Ted Cruz, although maybe not with Ted Cruz. Pat Buchanan, certainly. Ross Perot, certainly. Andrew Jackson, way back in history. And a few others, you know, Barry Goldwater, etc. Of course, with the exception of Andrew Jackson, none of those guys have ended up winning the presidency. But that's not even the point. The point is he has that base, and that base is going to vote for him come hell or high water, right? But there's also a large number of both Republicans and undecideds, and even some Democrats who are getting fed up with the Democratic Party, who do not fit into that category, who are planning to vote for Trump because they don't like what they see as sham trials, because they don't like that gas costs anywhere from $3 to $5, depending on what area of the country you're in, because they don't like mass inflation, although admittedly Trump actually had a lot to do with that, because they don't like the obvious senility of our current president, because they don't like what happened in Afghanistan, because they don't like everything that's happening around the world with Ukraine and with Israel and, you know, so on and so forth. There's a lot of people who are wanting to vote for Trump, not because they love Trump, but because they don't like Biden and because they just want to be able to afford food, to afford houses, so on and so forth. And they have fond memories, rightly so, of the economy under his administration. The economy was doing quite well under his administration. Now, I will point out, Biden's policies have certainly screwed the economy, but Trump's end of his term policies also did, namely 2020 coronavirus policies. But nevertheless, most people are remembering everything before that. And it is also true that Biden has made it worse and that there was a Democratic Congress at that time. It's a complicated issue, right? Point is, they look back at a Trump economy, they look back at the world when Trump was president, and they think to themselves, I miss that. Right now, we're in hell in a handbasket, right? And we just want to avoid having to go through that. I'd like to buy a house at some point, right? And they think Trump might be able to do something about that. That's why they want to vote for him. So then when things come out that accuse him of being a criminal, right? And he's found guilty of being a criminal, those people, since they're not rabid Trump supporters, are going to be questioning, okay, am I actually voting for Donald Trump? I don't know. I think there are certain communities where that matters less, but certainly with suburban women, especially single women, that's a big problem. Certainly with religious conservatives, that can be a very big problem, especially the more evangelical you get. Certainly with a lot of people in the kind of upper, kind of high end, right? The upper class, that can be a big problem. So, you know, and like I said, with undecided voters and with independents, that can be a very big problem. Or with Democrats who are potentially thinking of not voting for the Democratic Party, that can be a big problem. So really, it makes perfect sense that Trump is declining in the polls after this guilty verdict, because he's not declining in his base. He's declining in all of that large number of people who are not a part of his base, who may have voted for him in 2016 and 2020 and could potentially vote for him in 2024. His base will not elect him in 2024. It's not big enough. It might be vocal, but it's very rare that anybody's base is that strong. In fact, I don't think that it's ever been the case, at least not at a national level, right? What you need is your base plus other people who can get on board with what you're talking about. Trump has that, but he is certainly in danger of losing that. And we can see that here in some of this polling. Although polling has been shown to be somewhat inaccurate from time to time, that is an asterisk we want to add here. In a redo of a recent New York Times TheCynicogue poll, Trump's 3-point edge over President Joe Biden before the jury rendered its verdict shrank to just a 1-point lead when respondents were quizzed after the decision. The recanvassing of the 2,000 voters provides a data-based reflection on the first conviction of a former president and presidential candidate though it may be no more than a snapshot this far out from the election, which is an important clarification to make. I appreciate them making it. Before the verdict, most Americans, polls showed, viewed the hush money case as less serious than Trump's other legal cases, which is interesting because I think it's the only one where they even have a shot at convicting him at all. But I digress. The slight shift from the initial polls in April and May were especially prominent among young, non-white, and less engaged Democratic-leaning voters, as I said. According to the new analysis, although this, I want to point out that also I think this misses the single women, middle-class women, and also I think they're, if I remember correctly, conservative Christians, but I could be wrong about that. 20% of Trump's previous supporters who are black are now supporting Biden, while only 2% of non-black previous Trump supporters decided to back Biden. That's a weird one for me, mostly because it's so obvious that Biden is racist, and also because in the black community, and I say this with as little racialist intent as possible, but it is just a matter of fact that in black communities, crime is not nearly as big of a deterrent, if you will, right? Like, obviously, a lot of these guys still love a lot of the rap artists and stuff like that they do. And I don't mean to just like degrade the black community to just rap artists. That's not what I mean. It's just to say that, like, you know, in upper middle class white communities, crime is taken much more seriously by the populace than in lower income black communities. I think everybody kind of knows that. Certainly, it is true that in lower income black communities, a lot of people have kind of some status they gain depending on what crimes they've committed. Obviously, not all crimes, but at least certain crimes. So that one kind of surprises me, but nevertheless, it is true. And who knows? Maybe it's a sign that the black community is becoming more serious on crime. I don't know. It also surprises me though, just because the Democratic Party is so clearly racist. And I don't understand why. I mean, I do in the sense that I intellectually get it, but like, it seems to me to be just very ridiculous that the black community has been so strongly supportive of Democrats who absolutely hate them. The New York Times Siena College findings also showed that 46% of those polled approved of the guilty verdict, while 33% disapproved and 16% said they hadn't heard enough about it to form an opinion. The poll is in line with other snap polls that were released days after the guilty verdict. A Reuters Ipsos poll released Friday showed that 10% of Republican registered voters said they were less likely to vote for the former president following the verdict. And a Morning Consult poll of registered voters found that Biden gained 3 percentage points to 45%, while support for Trump remained the same, 44%, which means it used to be 44-42. Trump was in the lead. Now 45-44, Biden is in the lead, right? So certainly an impact as a result of this, but we will see what happens. Trump is going to appeal the verdict. Barr and McConnell have said that the Trump conviction will be overturned, though many legal experts disagree with them. We were actually going to read an article about that, but I just don't have the time. Trump has said he's going to appeal this, and he may end up winning the appeal. We'll see what happens. Regardless, we are in an unprecedented time, ladies and gentlemen. This kind of thing used to not happen at all, and it is now, in fact, happening, and we're going to have to deal with the consequences of it happening here in the near future. But we're out of time. So if you liked this video, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every single time that we go live. And remember to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, or critiques in the comment section down below. As long as they're not completely stupid, I will respond to them. I have to point that out because some people on my other channel have been trolling me. And it's like, yeah, you're not going to get any interaction from me if you're just trolling, my guy. I'm sorry. Remember, you can support the work we do here either by subscribing to the Patreon. Remember, if you subscribe for a certain fee, you will be getting access to our Blogletite blog. You can also give a one-time donation to the PayPal or give even less than you want for the Blogletite if you wanted to subscribe but didn't want to pay that much. You obviously wouldn't get access to Blogletite, but you'd still be supporting us monthly, and we would appreciate it. And remember that you can follow us on various social media platforms: Gab, Twitter, Facebook, Minds, Meta, not Meta. Why did I say Meta? Instagram, I think I might have already said all of them. Just find me at the TheCynicogue and share this video to those, right? Also, please remember to support us on the Rumble account. And let me just go ahead and say, in the face of Armageddon, be vigilant, first off, and ask yourselves, in the face of Armageddon, Will you compromise